20,000 years is a length of time the human mind resists by instinct. It is longer than all of recorded history combined, longer than agriculture, cities, empires, science, and industry. Everything we use to define progress fits inside a fraction of that span. When humans imagine the future, we think in decades, sometimes centuries. Space does not. Space operates on gravity, radiation, orbital mechanics, and timescales so vast they erase intention. This is not a prediction and not a promise. It is a question meant to unsettle a deeply held assumption. What would humanity look like if it did not collapse, reset, or vanish, but continued without interruption for 20,000 years beyond Earth? The obvious challenges are not the important ones. Rockets, stations, habitats, and propulsion are engineering problems, and engineering problems eventually yield to persistence. The real uncertainty is whether intelligence itself can survive long enough to matter. Whether a species shaped by short-term survival can commit to futures it will never personally experience. Space is not instantly lethal. That belief is comforting and incorrect. Space erodes. Radiation accumulates silently. Isolation reshapes psychology. Closed systems punish neglect without warning. Survival does not fail dramatically. It fails quietly, through small errors that compound over time. Every world in the solar system is hostile by default, not malicious, not broken, simply indifferent. Gravity is wrong. Atmospheres are missing, poisonous or crushing. Temperatures drift far outside biological comfort. There is no hidden paradise waiting to be discovered, only environments shaped without reference to human life. This leads to a more disturbing question. If humanity spreads into space, will it still be humanity after 20,000 years? Or will survival itself demand changes so profound that the word human loses its original meaning? Colonizing the solar system is not about conquest. It is about fear. Fear of a single planet carrying the entire weight of a species. Fear that one impact, one collapse, or one irreversible mistake could end the story forever. And here is the thought that should linger. If humanity succeeds in becoming a permanent spacefaring species, the most important moment in human history will not be the first landing on Mars. It will be the moment Earth stops being necessary. Once that happens, familiarity becomes optional, and nothing about the future is guaranteed to resemble the past. Once Earth stops being necessary, survival becomes conditional. The mistake is imagining space as an extension of exploration, a new ocean to cross, a new continent to settle. Space is not a frontier. Frontiers allow retreat, replenishment, and failure without consequence. Space allows none of these. Every human presence beyond Earth exists inside systems that must function perfectly, continuously, and without interruption for years, then decades, then centuries. On Earth, nature absorbs error. Crops fail, storms pass, ecosystems recover. In space, there is no background system to catch mistakes. Air, water, gravity, temperature, and shielding are not provided. They are manufactured. Survival is no longer biological by default. It is engineered. This changes what it means to endure. The first long-term settlements would not resemble cities. They would resemble life support experiments stretched across generations. Habitats where maintenance is not a job but a moral obligation. Where neglect is not inconvenience but extinction, delayed by minutes or hours. Over time, selection begins to operate in unfamiliar ways. Not through predators or climate, but through psychology, discipline, and tolerance for confinement. Communities that fail to manage resources precisely disappear quietly. Those that survive do so because they adapt socially before they adapt technologically. Space does not reward ambition, it rewards restraint. As human presence spreads, it does not fill the solar system evenly. It fragments. Isolated habitats drift in orbit. Martian settlements grow inward, not outward. Each location develops rules shaped by physics rather than preference. Lightspeed delay erases centralized control. Authority cannot arrive in time to matter. What remains is local autonomy enforced by necessity. This is where history begins to bend. humanity has always relied on shared environments to anchor identity. In space, environments diverge immediately. Gravity differs, radiation differs, cycles of day and night are artificial. The body begins to change, slowly but permanently. Lower gravity reshapes bone and muscle. Radiation alters risk across generations. Children born away from Earth grow into bodies adapted to conditions their ancestors never evolved for. Returning home becomes difficult, then impossible. This is not evolution driven by desire. It is adaptation driven by survival. And with adaptation comes separation. Not dramatic, not sudden, but cumulative. 20,000 years does not produce one future for humanity. It produces many, each shaped by the quiet pressure of living where humans were never meant to live. Space does not ask whether humanity will expand. It asks what must be left behind in order to last. As humanity adapts, planets quietly lose their status as destinations. The realization arrives slowly but becomes impossible to ignore. Planets impose conditions humans must fight forever. Gravity cannot be adjusted. Atmospheres leak or crush. Radiation arrives without permission. Every planetary settlement becomes a permanent struggle against forces too large to negotiate with. Space itself offers something planets never will: control. In orbit, gravity is created, not endured. Rotation replaces mass. Radiation can be shielded deliberately rather than endured passively. Temperature is regulated precisely. There are no earthquakes, no volcanoes, no runaway climates waiting to undo centuries of effort. The most stable human habitats are not found on worlds, but built around emptiness. Asteroids become foundations rather than obstacles. They are small, lifeless and indifferent, yet rich in metals, water ice and carbon compounds. Materials that are rare and costly on Earth exist here in abundance, already free from deep gravity wells. Construction no longer begins on planets and moves outward. It begins in space and never returns. This is the quiet turning point in human history. When habitats can be built where resources already are, space becomes cheaper than planets. Structures are modular, expandable, replaceable. A failure does not erase a civilization. It erases a single habitat among thousands. Redundancy replaces permanence. From a distance, the solar system appears empty. No megastructures, no glowing empires, just scattered motion. Millions of small artificial worlds moving silently along calculated paths, each supporting a population small enough to remain manageable, large enough to persist. Life inside these habitats feels nothing like life on Earth. Skies are ceilings, horizons are curves. Day and night are schedules, not consequences of stars. Nature is no longer something encountered. It is something simulated. Over generations, this becomes normal. Children born inside rotating cylinders and buried habitats do not feel confined. Earthborn ideas of open space lose relevance. Survival depends not on land or weather, but on maintenance, coordination, and trust in systems that cannot fail. Humanity does not conquer the solar system. It dissolves into it. By the time planets are slowly transformed, if they ever are, humanity has already learned to live without them. Space is no longer a place humans visit. It is the environment that reshapes them. From a distance, nothing seems to have happened. There are no reshaped planets glowing with artificial light, no vast structures visible across the solar system, no obvious signs of conquest or dominance. To an outside observer, the system appears quiet, sparse, almost abandoned. This absence is not failure, it is design. A civilization built to last does not advertise itself. Humanity's expansion does not concentrate population into a few monumental worlds. It distributes it. Thousands, then millions of independent habitats occupy stable orbits, Lagrange points, and asteroid clusters. Each one is small enough to manage, isolated enough to survive failure elsewhere, and redundant enough to be replaced when necessary. This architecture changes everything. On Earth, collapse is contagious. Ecosystems are connected. Economies intertwine. Failure spreads. In space, separation becomes protection. A habitat that fails does not poison a planet. It disappears quietly, its loss absorbed statistically rather than catastrophically. Survival becomes a property of the system, not the individual settlement. Population growth slows. There is no frontier pressure, no land to claim, no incentive to expand endlessly. Most work is done by automation. Human presence is deliberate and sparse. The solar system fills not with people, but with infrastructure moving slowly and purposefully through darkness. Inside these habitats, life is controlled but stable. There are no seasons, no natural disasters, no unexpected storms. Change arrives only when it is chosen. This stability reshapes culture. Risk becomes unacceptable. Redundancy becomes instinct. Maintenance becomes the highest form of responsibility. The idea of a single human civilization begins to dissolve. Distance ensures it. Communication delays stretch from minutes to hours. Decisions arrive late. Authority loses meaning when it cannot act in time. Each habitat governs itself according to local realities. Mars diverges. The asteroid communities diverge further. The outer system grows quiet, patient, and absolute. This fragmentation is not ideological. It is physical. Over centuries, shared assumptions erode. Laws evolve differently. Ethics adapt to the environment. What makes sense in a rotating habitat feels irrational on a planetary surface. Humanity does not fracture violently. It simply stops agreeing with itself. Yet this disunity is also resilient. No single failure can end the story now. No single disaster can erase humanity everywhere at once. The civilization looks empty because emptiness is how it survives. From within, it is not lonely. It is cautious. And caution, over 20,000 years, proves stronger than ambition. As the solar system fills with quiet habitats, time itself becomes a barrier. Distance is not measured in kilometers anymore. It is measured in delay. Light takes minutes to cross the inner system and hours to reach the outer worlds. Messages arrive after decisions are already made. By the time authority responds, circumstances have changed beyond recognition. Control does not fail. It becomes meaningless. Humanity has never experienced this before. On Earth, even at its largest scale, civilization shared a present. News, crises, and responses unfolded within the same day. In space, simultaneity disappears. There is no shared now. Every conversation across worlds is historical by the time it arrives. This changes how societies function. Governance becomes local not by ideology but by physics. Settlements must act independently because waiting is lethal. Mars cannot wait for Earth. The belt cannot wait for Mars. The outer system cannot wait for anyone. Autonomy is no longer a political choice. It is a survival requirement. Over centuries, this enforced independence reshapes identity. Communities begin to define themselves not by origin, but by isolation. Laws evolve according to environment. Ethics adapt to constraint. What is moral in a sealed habitat may be impossible on a planetary surface. Humanity does not argue itself apart. It drifts. Conflict still exists, but it changes form. Interplanetary war is slow, expensive, and strategically irrational. By the time force arrives, motivations have faded, targets have moved. Violence does not disappear, but it loses its efficiency. Distance becomes a brake on catastrophe. The greater danger is divergence. Language shifts. Customs adapt. Shared assumptions decay quietly. Over thousands of years, humanity does not fracture into enemies. It fragments into versions of itself that no longer instinctively understand one another. Memory weakens without reinforcement. Earth becomes a reference point rather than a home. Gravity becomes a myth. Blue skies become a story taught rather than experienced. This is the price of resilience. A civilization spread across light hours cannot remain synchronized. It trades unity for survival, coherence for endurance. Humanity persists, but no longer as a single voice speaking at once. Instead, it becomes a chorus heard out of sequence, each part shaped by distance, delay, and the quiet realization that no one else is coming in time to help. As distance fragments society, biology begins to follow. The human body evolved under a narrow set of conditions. One gravity, one atmosphere, one magnetic field, one star. Space removes every one of those constants. In the short term, technology compensates. In the long term, compensation becomes adaptation. Lower gravity alters bones before it alters culture. Muscles weaken, skeletons stretch, cardiovascular systems change how they move blood. These effects are manageable for visitors, but they accumulate across generations. Children born in reduced gravity grow taller, lighter, and structurally different. What begins as a medical concern becomes a biological norm. Radiation adds another pressure. Even with shielding, exposure increases mutation rates and long-term health risks. Over centuries, survival favors bodies and metabolisms better suited to repair, resistance, or tolerance. This is not deliberate engineering at first. It is selection operating inside artificial environments. Closed habitats reshape immunity. Sterile systems reduce exposure. Microbiomes change. Immune responses adapt to predictable, controlled ecosystems rather than wild ones. Returning to Earth becomes difficult, then dangerous. Earth's gravity is crushing. Its microbes are overwhelming. Home becomes physically incompatible. At first, these differences are subtle. Then, they stop being reversible. Medicine responds. Genetic screening becomes routine. Assisted reproduction adjusts for local conditions. Modifications once debated as ethical abstractions become practical survival tools. Adaptation is no longer left entirely to chance. It is guided, constrained, optimized. Humanity does not divide into new species overnight. The split is slower, quieter, and more unsettling. The word human stretches rather than breaks. Identity becomes tied to environment in a literal sense. Earthborn norms lose authority, not through rebellion, but irrelevance. What counts as healthy changes? What counts as capable changes? What counts as normal changes? Over thousands of years, shared biology fades as a unifying force. An inhabitant of a rotating habitat does not experience the world the same way as someone raised under planetary gravity. Neither is superior. Both are shaped by necessity. This divergence is not failure. It is the cost of persistence. Humanity survives, but no longer as a single biological template. It becomes a family of related forms, bound by ancestry and memory rather than uniformity, carrying the quiet realization that survival has rewritten what it means to be human. As bodies diverge, culture follows more quietly. Earth does not vanish in fire or catastrophe. It fades through distance. For the first generations, Earth is remembered personally, a place of origin, a reference point for gravity, sky, and weather. But memory does not survive on its own. It requires repetition, relevance, and reinforcement. In space, those supports weaken. Seasons lose meaning inside sealed habitats. There is no winter or summer, only schedules. Skies become ceilings. Horizons become curves. Concepts once tied to land and climate slowly detach from lived experience. Children learn about oceans they will never touch and storms they will never fear. Earth becomes educational rather than emotional. Language begins to shift. Metaphors rooted in nature lose clarity. New expressions emerge from machinery, maintenance, and orbital motion. Culture adapts to what matters. What keeps people alive shapes what they celebrate. Infrastructure replaces nature as the center of meaning. Maintenance becomes ritual. Redundancy becomes virtue. Carelessness is treated not as a flaw, but as a moral failure. Stories are no longer about conquering landscapes, but about systems that held, repairs made in time, disasters narrowly avoided. Mythology grows around endurance rather than discovery. Over centuries, shared traditions weaken. Holidays tied to planetary cycles feel arbitrary in artificial environments. History fragments as communities preserve different parts of the past. There is no single narrative reinforced everywhere at once. This creates a risk that is easy to overlook. When Earth stops feeling relevant, its lessons begin to erode. Environmental collapse, resource exhaustion, and political failure can be reframed as planetary problems rather than human ones. Distance makes it tempting to believe that redundancy guarantees wisdom. Preserving memory becomes deliberate work. Archives must survive language drift, reinterpretation, and cultural filtering. Knowledge must be translated forward, not merely stored. The danger is not forgetting facts, but forgetting why those facts mattered. Yet forgetting is not entirely avoidable. New societies cannot remain psychologically anchored to a world they will never see. Identity must adapt or fracture under nostalgia. Earth becomes a story humanity tells itself, not to return, but to remember what survival once depended on. In this way, culture does not collapse. It transforms quietly into something shaped not by a planet, but by the long discipline of living without one. As culture transforms, survival itself changes shape. Humanity no longer rises or falls together. Spread across planets, orbits, and habitats, existence becomes uneven by design. Some communities thrive quietly for centuries, others fail without warning. There's no single collapse, no final moment. Extinction, if it comes, arrives as a thinning rather than an ending. On Earth, catastrophe propagates. Ecosystems collapse together. Economies unravel together. In space, separation limits contagion. A habitat that fails does not doom its neighbours, it disappears, its absence absorbed statistically by the larger system. Survival becomes a probability rather than a guarantee. This is resilience, but it carries a cost. When failure is localised, urgency fades. Tragedy feels distant. A disaster light hours away arrives as data, not shock. The emotional weight that once unified humanity weakens. Compassion stretches thin across distance and delay. Infrastructure fills the solar system faster than people. Automated systems mine asteroids, refine fuel, and assemble habitats with minimal human oversight. Human presence becomes specialized and sparse. Most of the solar system is busy, but not crowded. This creates an illusion of permanence. Redundancy feels like immunity. A civilization with millions of independent habitats appears impossible to erase. An asteroid impact that sterilizes a planet does not reach orbiting worlds. A political collapse remains local. Even stellar events unfold slowly enough to allow migration and adjustment. Yet this safety is incomplete. A distributed civilization is harder to destroy, but harder to coordinate. Shared responses to existential threats require alignment across societies that no longer think alike. Survival becomes decentralized, but meaning does not automatically follow. Some branches preserve knowledge carefully, others neglect it. Some adapt responsibly, others drift towards short-term stability at long-term cost. No central authority corrects the imbalance. Time sorts outcomes silently. Humanity persists, but unevenly. There is no single future, only many trajectories unfolding in parallel. Some endure, some fail. Most leave no trace beyond abandoned orbits and silent structures drifting until decay claims them. This is the price of endurance. Survival is no longer a collective achievement. It is a statistical property emerging from distribution, redundancy, and time, carrying the unsettling truth that humanity can continue without ever fully agreeing on what it is continuing for. As survival becomes uneven, memory becomes fragile, physical structures fail slowly, metal corrodes, seals weaken, systems drift out of calibration. These failures are expected and planned for. Knowledge fails differently. It does not break, it erodes. Instructions lose context. Reasons become footnotes. Procedures survive long after the conditions that created them are forgotten. A civilization spread across the solar system cannot rely on a single archive or authority. Information must be distributed, translated, and reinterpreted across cultures that no longer share assumptions. Over time, this translation introduces distortion, not through malice, but through relevance. Facts that no longer feel useful are neglected. Lessons learned through catastrophe on Earth are reframed as planetary problems rather than universal ones. Warnings sound abstract when the environments that produce them no longer exist. This is the most dangerous failure mode. Knowing how to build a habitat is meaningless if no one remembers why redundancy matters. Knowing how to mine asteroids is dangerous if the social consequences of imbalance are forgotten. Knowledge without context becomes a tool without restraint. Preservation turns into an active discipline. Archives are replicated endlessly, not as monuments, but as utilities. Education prioritizes principles over details, teaching why systems exist rather than merely how to operate them. Even so, drift is inevitable. Languages change, symbols lose clarity, meaning thins with each reinterpretation. Some societies maintain rigorous continuity. Others allow convenience to replace caution. Time amplifies the difference. There is no single collapse when knowledge fails. Mistakes repeat quietly. Systems are simplified to the edge of safety. Margins shrink unnoticed. Failures occur not because solutions are unknown, but because their importance is no longer felt. Across 20,000 years, this erosion shapes destiny more than any external threat. Asteroids, radiation, and stellar change are visible dangers. Forgetting is invisible until it is too late. Humanity survives its enemies. Its greatest risk is surviving long enough to forget why it once feared them. In a civilization built to endure, memory itself must be treated as life support, maintained deliberately, redundantly, and without assuming it will protect itself. After 20,000 years, humanity has not escaped danger. It has learned how to delay it. The solar system is alive with motion. Habitats drift, planets host fragile outposts, archives orbit silently, and distant communities persist without ever sharing the same present. Humanity survives, not as a single civilization, but as a pattern distributed across space and time. This was always the real transformation. Colonizing the solar system does not create safety. It converts extinction from a moment into a process. There is no final collapse, no single disaster that ends the story everywhere at once. Failure arrives unevenly. Some branches endure, others vanish quietly, leaving behind abandoned structures and fading records that no one notices until much later. From the inside, this feels like success. Cosmic threats lose their finality. Asteroid impacts become local tragedies. Stellar change unfolds slowly enough to adapt around. Even the gradual brightening of the sun becomes a logistical problem rather than a death sentence. Humanity buys time, and time changes how danger is perceived. But time also changes responsibility. A distributed species no longer rises or falls together. Survival becomes statistical. Meaning becomes optional. There is no moment when humanity decides its fate. It drifts into it through countless local choices, each reasonable on its own, each irreversible when combined. The solar system does not become a kingdom or an empire. It becomes a filter. Only societies capable of patience, restraint, and long memory persist. Others exhaust themselves maintaining comfort without understanding cost. In the end, this is the answer the future delivers. Humanity can spread across worlds. It can reshape itself, fragment culturally, diverge biologically, and persist far longer than any single planet ever could. What it cannot escape is entropy. Every structure requires care. Every archive requires translation. Every generation must relearn why survival depends on discipline rather than dominance. If that lesson fails, no amount of distance will save what remains. 20,000 years is not eternity. It is long enough to discover whether intelligence can think beyond instinct, whether memory can outlast convenience, and whether survival can be chosen again and again without guarantees. If humanity succeeds, the solar system will not remember us as conquerors. It will remember us as the species that learned how to last. And that may be the most unsettling conclusion of all. The future does not end with triumph or collapse, but with continuity that must be actively maintained. Survival is no longer dramatic. It is procedural, quiet, earned slowly, lost slowly, shaped by decisions too small to feel historic until their consequences accumulate across centuries. Question is no longer whether humanity reaches stars, but whether it remains worthy of time it has taken from universe. Always.